Hi everyone, my name's Jess. I'm here with my partner G, my 1 week old son Kaya, and I also have a 4-year-old daughter Gilly who's in daycare today. First of all, settle in, and I'm sorry if this is way too long. I actually know that it is, and I apologize in advance, but I've been thinking so seriously and so deeply about this since being asked to share my story 5 days ago after giving birth and in ground zero of my 4th trimester. And I want to do justice to this opportunity for all the right reasons. And straight up, I know that so many people have had it so much worse than me. And I'm really mindful of that reality and the space I hold right now in sharing my story and being invited to do so. So here goes. I have 3 stories I'd like to share, which is why this is going to take a while. One of my daughter Gilly's hospital birth, one about my miscarriage, and my home birth last week to Kaya. First, I'm going to start with Gilly's birth. In January 2020, I gave birth to Gilly at RPA Hospital via the midwifery group practice program. Everything was smooth sailing for me in my pregnancy. I did the She Births course and basically all of the recommended reading, yoga, meditation, visualization, belly dance birth, spinning babies. Well, no, there's so much more that someone can do, but I was practicing everything that I knew at that time that was available to me to do my bit to prepare for a physiological birth. I understood the evidence and the importance of this rite of passage, and I put in the hard yards to the best of my knowledge and ability. And I was under the assumption that I was going to participate in an evidence-based best practice model that was going to support me to birth Gilly in a really safe and empowering way and respectful way. However, on that day that I gave birth to Gilly, my continuity of care was broken. I lost my named midwife. I lost the team of midwives that she worked within. And on that day, through no fault of my own, because of bad luck, staffing, funding, I don't know. I wasn't given a proper explanation why, but I fell into the fragmented care model that I never chose, I didn't want, and I knew that the outcomes for me and my baby were not good for. And this is what happened. So, at 37 weeks and 2 days, I went into labour. On that day, my MGP midwife did not support me during my labour, despite being on shift in the hospital at that time, and I never received a satisfactory explanation as to why that was the case. Unfortunately, I didn't feel confident to question this in my postnatal appointments with her. And I think I knew that on that day it was some sort of policy or rostering issue which was out of her hands. Even though she was pressed for time in every short antenatal appointment with me and often didn't have time to answer the questions that I had about labour because of these time constraints, I actually did feel like our values aligned with what I was working for in preparation for my birth, and I felt really confident in her care. It was really shit that on that day that she couldn't have supported me in my labour as per the continuity of care model that I chose through a publicly funded health system, and because I really do believe that if I would have stayed with her and birthed with her, I would have had a vastly different and positive birthing experience with her. The RPA birthing centre which I booked into was full or otherwise unavailable. So I ended up giving birth in the maternity ward with an unknown midwife, fragmented model of care, who, to be honest, I didn't feel like she was invested in my labour. I felt like I was an inconvenience, like I had to be the good girl and somehow make her like me to survive that experience. I was later told by her that it was her last day working in the MGP program. She was moving on. Maybe she was burnt out. Maybe she wasn't properly supported by the system. And you know, personally, I've always wondered if she was just hoping for a quiet last shift where she could slip away into something else rather than being called in to assist me. Maybe she was just exhausted. I'd been labouring really well at home, but after arriving at hospital fully dilated, my labour stalled. And I went from feeling in the pocket and in as control as I possibly could be in labour to being not. One of my most salient memories was arriving to the room fully dilated and the midwife chucking down a couple of mats on the floor and me thinking, oh, okay, is this how I'm going to birth? And I took the cue from her and I went with it. There was no discussion about my birth preferences, which I had in my hospital bag and never came out, or whether I wanted to get into a bath or birth in any other position, or in fact whether I was ever ready to push. And now, having experienced a physiological birth, I knew, and I know now, that I wasn't. I felt like there was zero effort to try and create the basic physical or interpersonal environment that I know is universally understood to facilitate birth. I was presented with a cascade of interventions that I felt like I had no choice to accept, and that included a vaginal examination, IV antibiotics because I was GBS positive, CTG monitoring followed by a fetal scalp electrode because of difficulty getting a reading from the CTG, an ultrasound, an induction, and an episiotomy. I clearly remember one moment after I'd been induced and my contractions became really intense and I was basically roaring over G's shoulder, and I looked across to the midwife and she was typing notes on her computer, and I remember thinking, isn't she meant to be helping me? Is this normal? Well, when it came to my final part of labour, when I was pushing out Gilly, after my episiotomy, I was told that if I didn't get her out in the next contraction, and I'm pretty sure I was given 2 contractions, that there would be a vacuum delivery. And I knew at that point that I was flying through the cascade of interventions, and I remember saying to myself, no way, it ends here. And I gave it all that I had and I birthed my daughter. And I felt especially proud about the fact that I held my shit together without losing it and navigated this gauntlet of interventions without any pain relief. Gilly was absolutely fine. And I instantly fell in love with her, and from my initial postpartum period, I forgot all about my labour. And I'm so thankful that I did. And that my experience of that did not disturb the connection that I felt with her immediately, because it was awesome. I spent 5 days in hospital after the birth, and the care on the ward was faultless. I invested in paying for my own room within the hospital so that G could stay with me 24/7. And I was so lucky that a room was available. And in that room, myself, Gilly, and G were cared for by a beautiful team of amazing midwives. And I remember all the names of them, and I wish I had time to name them all right now. But when I got home and the dust settled, I started to process my birthing experience, and feelings of disappointment towards myself started to emerge. I felt guilty that I didn't push Gilly out on my own, like I wasn't strong enough and I didn't try hard enough. And for over a year, I kid you not, literally, thoughts and feelings around that hung over me like a cloud and preoccupied me on a daily basis, sometimes multiple times a day. Okay, now I want to talk to you about my miscarriage. In 2022, I fell pregnant again, and this time after my mind being blown by the birthtime documentary, participating in the birth experience study, and my own personal research around midwifery models of care, I decided on a home birth model this time round. But at 16 weeks, I experienced a miscarriage. I chose to attend RPA for medical management of this, and I received exemplary care from the pregnancy assessment service, from the early pregnancy assessment service, and the midwifery team on the postnatal ward that looked after me during my stay. And again, I remember all of their names. This team treated me with the utmost respect and dignity at a time that I was truly vulnerable. They provided information that I used to keep safe, particularly around pain relief, which saved me when I felt like things were getting out of control and actually becoming unsafe. due to the physical intensity of that experience. They supported me to birth my very, very little baby to the best of my ability and in accordance with my wishes. They also supported me during those first few days in hospital when I was recovering, both physically and emotionally. And I left RPA feeling at peace, integrated, and intact. You wouldn't think it was possible. But honestly, that birth experience was better than Gillies. I learned what was possible in terms of woman-centered care, which I believe was only possible because my baby wasn't alive. And also, because on the day that I gave birth, there was ample staff available to provide the level of care that left me feeling safe and supported, and also my partner feeling safe and supported. In the days that followed, this wasn't the case, and the ward was understaffed, and and I was literally told by the midwives that I was lucky that I delivered on the day that I did during my hospital stay, and if I came in on another day, I would have had a vastly different experience. I was lucky. It shouldn't have to take a baby who is no longer alive and luck on delivering on the right day to receive respectful and empowering pregnancy care. Okay, now I'm going to talk about Kaya's birth. After what felt like forever, last year I fell pregnant again, and I gave birth to my son Kaya last week. Again, I chose the option of a private midwife and a home birth with Joe Hunter, who's here today. Why? Because I truly wanted to experience continuity of midwifery care. I ummed and I ahed after both of my contrasting experiences in hospital with midwives, in care models. But I decided that in no way was I going to leave one of the biggest days of my life and the biggest rites of passage to chance, bad luck, or poor staffing. So I went for a home birth with a private midwife. I went out of the system. Working with Jo was and is amazing. It's amazing being in her care. I felt so supported, and I learnt so much during and in between each of our appointments. And the whole experience was so different to Gilly's antenatal care. I revisited the same resources for Gilly's birth and threw in a few new ones on top, including the Great Birth Rebellion podcast and the Core and Floor Restore program, which affirmed my decision in my chosen model of care, optimized by which affirmed my decision in my chosen model of care, and also optimized my preparations for a physiological birth, and totally validated my experience of pregnancy the first time round in the hospital system. And almost this time last week, after a 6-hour-long labour, I gave birth to Kaya in our apartment, in a birthing pool, set up in the lounge with no pain relief. It was everything I dared to imagine. And yes, of course, it was one of the most challenging things I've ever done, but it was achievable and wonderful. And I feel at peace with it. I feel whole. And now, right now, present in my experience of a mother. I'm ready to move on and care for my baby and look after my family. I'm ready to smile and laugh with my incredible husband, my wild little girl, and my divine little boy. I'm also ready to cry. Tears of joy and other emotions too. I feel proud, integrated, powerful, and satisfied. Having the amount of time I had with Jo in the lead up to Kaya's birth was so useful. I was able to process and work through all the thoughts and feelings and questions that were lingering from my experience in hospital with Gilly. It was such a big job that I knew that I needed to do to go into my home birth safely and confidently. But my gosh, it took up an enormous number of hours during my pregnancy, and there was so much debunking, unpacking, debriefing that Jo and I did in my appointments, and I did on my own to pick up the pieces from Gilly's birth, which I'm so grateful for. But Joe shouldn't have had to do that in the first place. At the time I gave birth to Gilly, I didn't realise that I was so let down by a hospital system so stacked against physiological birth. For a year, I internalised all of that responsibility of not pushing hard enough on that mat. Now, I know that most people don't have the opportunity or resources to engage in such a process of healing, and it both breaks my heart and makes me mad with rage to know that the vast majority of women just have to accept the trauma, cope with inadequate or no support, or simply just cut it off and keep on going to survive. I had the best support from my partner and access to an amazing midwife throughout my pregnancy, birth, and now postpartum. And one week in, I still feel like I'm only just keeping my head above the water with breastfeeding, family visits, and supporting my daughter with this huge transition. But for all the women that don't have this, I can only imagine how bloody hard it is to wake up day after day following a traumatizing and disempowering birth and do all of these things and more. To enter postpartum feeling anything less than complete, proud, satisfied, and powerful is absolutely unacceptable, especially because of factors that can be improved within our maternity system, especially when there is high quality research and evidence out there for what works when it comes to supporting better outcomes for women and their babies. And especially when this sort of information and the choices that women have about their pregnancy and birth care is not easily accessible and mainstream. I felt like a lot of the gold that I learnt through my pregnancy journeys came about as a result of chance, which scares the crap out of me. So, in wrapping up, I urge the New South Wales Government to fix the maternity system so everyone can access the respectful, empowering and evidence-based pregnancy and birth care that is their right to receive, and the opportunity to experience one of the most transformative, powerful and central rites of passage in our lives.